we both grew up in London. You come from a scholarly family. But going back to the 80s and 90s, I don't think you aspire to be in this field that you're in of service, of khidmah, of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Tell me about those years, the 80s, the 90s. What do you remember from the community, from where you grew up?
Yeah, the 80s and 90s, I don't think anyone aspired to be an English lecturer, because there really was no such thing as becoming a khatib or a lecturer or reciter in the English language. We were finding our feet in this country, having to juggle so many identities. And we thank really the founding fathers of the mosques that were able to cater for this generation that was half Iraqi, half British, half Iranian, half British, half Khaja, half British, half Pakistani, half British. A number of the leaders of our communities, they were fantastic in the way that many of us don't appreciate. They were the ones who bought pieces of land, purchased freehold buildings to make sure that we were all able to gather together on the nights of the wilada and the shahada of the imams of Ahlul Bayt. And so I remember in the 80s, you're looking back in the 80s, my first memory would be 87 near Baker Street Station, Al-Jam'iyya Al-Iraqiyya, which was there, Al-Jam'iyya they used to call it, and although it was made up mainly of the Iraqi community and the Bahraini community and people like that who had come together to try and serve the community. And the Imam of the mosque at that time was Sayyid Hussein al-Shami, Abu Musa. He was the Imam of the mosque. We're talking 87. At the same time in Clapham, which at that time was an area you wouldn't necessarily visit without thinking where the nearest hospital may be. And today you look at it, it's just like, it's just gone so
different,
trendy now. And I think at that time we used to go to Markaz Ahlul Bayt, if you remember. And there was a great combination of the great scholar and one of the best leaders you could have, Said Mahdi al-Hakim, may Allah bless his soul. Said Muhammad Bahr al-Ulum, may Allah bless his soul. And at the same time, you had in Muharram, the Balaghi family with their outstanding work that they used to do. So these people were the bedrock of our upbringing. You had, for example, schools like Madrasat al-Huda, which many would have attended, and I don't think my teachers necessarily would have predicted that I would become who I became. Al-Marhum Abu Haydar Zwain, God bless his soul, he gave so much effort. So you had a community that was coming together, a community that had realized that the bedrock of the growth of the Shia community is Muharram and Shahr Ramadan. And during that period, there is also a development of the Khaja community. You've got Al-Majma' in Holland Park, which was a place I'd love to be at on the 21st or the 23rd of Ramadan. So we are indebted to all of these places, not forgetting the marhum from the Nuruz Zada family, who had also been one of the main pillars of establishing the lectures in the majalis. But the reality was that these lectures were all in Arabic or in Urdu or in Farsi. So I don't think many of us were necessarily interested in sitting in the lectures. There's no way that I used to enjoy sitting in the lectures. I do remember, if there was any lecturer who I may have enjoyed listening to in those early years, Mullah Asghar, may Allah bless his soul, had certain lectures which I vividly remember due to the encouragement of my parents and ensuring, especially my mother, pushing us that we didn't live far away from Stanmore Mosque, and therefore they had some fantastic programs there at the time. But again, there was nothing there that would make me think that I would become a lecturer, because there was no real inspiration in the lectures.
I remember the Khoi days, though. The Latom was one thing we looked forward to.
Oh yeah, for sure. You know, Latom, Matam, we used to love it. Who could get the redder chest? I think that was a major competition on the reddest chests. So, you know, the idea that we love Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and the idea that we will go in for latom or food and so on, that was a vital component. And if ever I could stress to the listeners, I would always say to them that, with your kids, make sure Muharram is the foundation. If you're not going to devote too much else, make sure they recognize the importance of Majalis al-Hussein, Sha'air al-Hussein, those areas in which we can gain closeness to what happened at Karbala. Because the more you reflect on Karbala, even if you just learned one thing, then it softens you. I don't know if you remember Sheikh al-Fadhili.
Yeah, of course.
Sheikh al-Fadhili, I would say, was the first to make me cry.
Okay.
Sheikh al-Fadhili was giving Arba'in at Al-Khu'i Mosque. If I'm not mistaken, around 96, maybe 95, 96. And he recited the maqtal of the Arba'in, and then he ends it with Ya Tarib al-Khad. And when I thought of Ya Tarib al-Khad and I thought of the translation, it was the first time that I broke down. And I think if in your period of adolescence, if you do break down, the heart softens, the soul suddenly finds areas where it can grow and develop. And so I thank all of these. But was I aspiring to one day sit where, these figures were sitting and to lead a community and to lecture on Islam? No, not at all. Not at all. There was nothing there.
So when's the turning point when you thought, yes, I'm going to do this. I'm going to serve my community?
I think we were given good opportunities to develop as leaders. Al-Hajj Abu Zainab al-Kadhimi used to encourage growth as leaders, as volunteers in the community. When you want to serve, you have to serve grassroots. People have to see that you've served grassroots. And you have to learn the meaning of giving back. And I think he was an inspiration in telling us to come back and to give back towards the community. And you had Sheikh Bilal at Al-Khu'i, who suddenly starts to encourage more and more that those of you who are volunteering, male and female, let me add, you should speak about your aspirations. You should speak about the religion that you love. And it was at the gym at Al-Khu'i that you suddenly start to develop a feeling. Dr. Abu Asma, if you remember well, also used to encourage the shabab to gather.
Yeah.
But I do think when Hajj Hassanin Rajab Ali came to London, I think at that time the image of English lecturing suddenly changes. Suddenly, it's not somebody who is knowledgeable but with an accent. Now you have someone who's knowledgeable but eloquent, motivational, you can relate to. And I do remember me and him speaking together at Queen Mary's University, Ahl al-Bayt Society event 2001. And him mentioning that, look, the demand is high, but the supply is low. And you're going to have to step up. And I was fortunate that we had a platform at Al-Haraka. And there are so many who I'm sure will listen to this will remember Al-Haraka Al-Haydariyah. And you guys have developed it to Haraka Al-Husayniyah, which, is something extremely proud of.
Alhamdulillah.
And hopefully the next generation will take a step back and say, Haraka Al-Hasaniyah, sorry, Imam, we forgot you.
Definitely.
So, with Haraka Al-Haydariyah, what's amazing is that we've got this group of youths who come together, very raw, but they all have a passion to serve. And I've had this passion to serve having returned from Umrah. I've seen Jannat al-Baqi'. I haven't cried at Jannat al-Baqi' out of realization that I don't know anything about Imam al-Hasan, Imam Zayn al-Abidin, Imam al-Baqir, and Imam al-Sadiq. Alayhim salam. And so it has an effect on me. When it has this effect on me, I tell the group of shabab around me. I remember I'd just come back from Umrah and our good friend Hussein Raouf.
Yep.
I see Hussein outside the mosque. And I'm telling him all about Umrah, and he's like to me, this is outstanding. He's telling me, bro, the passion that you have for this is phenomenal. And I'm telling him about what I've gone through in Umrah and how There's a need for us to talk about Ahl al-Bayt. Why are we making excuses that the lectures are in Arabic or Urdu or Farsi? Why don't we now develop something in the English language? And I remember him telling me, well, who's going to kick it off? And I said, well, I'll do it. And we started to bring others in from the different groups of the Shabab at the time, the different groups of the youths in the Iraqi community. And we decided to start Al-Haraka. And here I am speaking every Friday at Al-Haraka. And when we're speaking every Friday, we start off with about 15 people at the beginning.
Yeah.
That develops to 30, that moves on to 60, that goes on to 120. Now there's Pakistani youth coming, now there's Afghan youth coming, Iranian converts have now found a space again after maybe being left out in the dark for a while. And so I would say that those were the turning points. You know, a mixture of having seen that there was a need in myself to speak about how little knowledge we have of A'immat al-Baqi' to begin with, of the Imams of Jannat al-Baqi'. Having seen Hajj Hassan Rajab Ali talk about the need for all of us to fulfill our potential, and then having had and been fortunate to be in a generation of Shabab who were like-minded, who wanted to see a development in the community in terms of religious learning in the English language, it all came together wonderfully. So I thank the Lord that He allowed me to emerge and flourish with all of these different opportunities and blessings emerging.
Alhamdulillah, today Sayed Ammar is known worldwide. And as I mentioned at the start, you know, you can only look at your lectures, for example, this Muharram or even the last few years of Muharram, you look at the views when they go on YouTube, when they're live, and the thousands of people from around the world watching them, building up to, you know, close to 1 million, if not more, on your YouTube channel, as I've noticed. But one thing that you're known for is your style of lecturing. How did that come about?
Well, that certainly wasn't the style at the beginning. At the beginning, it was absolutely raw. And here I am, I'm just like jumping from topic to topic, and I'm screaming as I'm talking. I'm loud. I can still be loud at certain moments, but I'm loud. But what comes from the heart reaches the heart. There was a lot of trial and error. And sometimes people are not forgiving to young speakers when they're in the process of trial and error. Ammar Nakshawani didn't begin as he is now.
No.
It's like marriage, for example. There is this belief that the son-in-law has to be as successful as the father is at this moment. Well, the father should remind himself, how were you when you first started? How was your success? Yeah. And so in the beginning, it was trial and error. Because remember, there's no ma'had, for example, or institute for khataba in English. There may have been in Arabic. There's an institute for how you develop lectures, how you structure lectures. There may have been in Farsi. There may have been in Urdu. But there wasn't in English. So for a lot of us, it was trial and error. I must admit that of the supervisors I had, Professor C.E. Bosworth, renowned Orientalist and great scholar of Islam, who passed away a few years ago, he did have a discussion with me about how my lectures should develop into essays. And he used to say to me that structure it like an essay. Intro. You're writing an essay. What would you have? You'd have intro. And then you'd have, for example, point 1, arguments for. Point 2, arguments against. Point 3, contemporary opinion. Point 4, which will, for example, come together with the conclusion. Imagine a non-Muslim provides a catalyst or an inspiration for what then develops into some of the most listened to lectures in the Shia world today. And that just goes to show you that God has a purpose for everybody. That might have been his sadaqah jariyah, by the way. The fact that he sat with his Muslim student and encouraged him to develop a method which hither to this point had never been done. You know, I used to remember listening to Sheikh Ahmed al-Wa'ili. May Allah bless his soul. Sheikh Ahmed al-Wa'ili will take a verse of the Quran which he'll then divide. but he wouldn't necessarily take a topic which he'd examine for 50 minutes in a row.
Would be a verse.
He has some.
Yeah.
But really, it's mainly a verse, unless he's doing a biography of a personality whose shahada is that night or so on. Normally it's a verse, then he breaks up the verse, and then in breaking up the verse, for example, let's say you take the ayah of the Quran, I don't know, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Inna alladhina amanu wa amilu as-salihat ulaika hum khayrul bariyah. Shaykh Ahmed al-Wa'li would say, the first portion we'll look at is, what is the meaning of Iman in Inna alladhina amanu? Number 2,
Amal salih.
Amal al-Salih. Number 3, Huwa khayrul bariyah. So he's taken an ayah and broken it down, but in breaking it down, he'll go off to different tangents.
Of course. Use poetry.
Use poetry and so on, stories, but he's going off to different tangents in the sense that, okay, Iman, here's a few stories on Iman. Amal al-Salih, here's a few points on Amal al-Salih. So it's not one topic for 45. You can go off to different areas, but he just done it perfectly. With myself, I looked at it and I thought, you know what, let me develop my lectures like an essay. Because the listener will know, okay, you know what, I wonder what he's going to say in point number 2. Point number 4. Oh my God. I've always asked that question, and now he's going to say it as point number 4. And so when someone leaves your lecture, they leave the lecture thinking, I can now repeat verbatim his structure. The problem with many lectures up to that point, and maybe even today, there's no structure. If you listen to, whether it's in Arabic or English, you'll hear a lecturer begin, talk about marriage. 15 minutes later is on akhlaq. 25 minutes later, it's talking about the community. 14 minutes later is about God. 11 minutes later. So by the end, you're like, there were so many nice points, but I don't know what the topic was.
Yep.
So I thought that with the style of intro, let's dissect this in complete depth. I really put a challenge on myself that I can continue to talk about this for 50 minutes. Not easy. There are many who won't do it, because to continue to talk about one topic for 50 minutes, you've got to study pretty hard, and you've got to have some pretty solid content. You can never, let me make this clear to the listeners, you can never explain everything related to that topic in 50 minutes. There are people who listen to you and say, but you could have said this and you could have said that. You're absolutely right. If you give me another 6 hours, I probably will.
Yeah.
But in 50 minutes, Muharram night 7, you try sitting up there and summarizing a topic in 50. So you develop that style, the essay style. And alhamdulillah, everywhere you go around the world, whether you go to the Indo-Pak subcontinent, or you go to the Middle East or parts of North America or Europe, people will always look at you and say, let's dissect this topic in complete depth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm honored. And I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving me, you know, that wisdom, that insight to be able to develop a style where a person's like, it's so easy to listen to Sayed Ammar's flow in a lecture. You know, that's all due to the Lord.